Welcome back to Proxy, everybody. And today we're actually going to be doing a review of a list that a subscriber sent in. So this is going to be a Craftworld Eldar list review. And, I was on the fence about doing these for a long time on the channel because I felt like maybe putting somebody's list out there on the internet didn't really strike me as something that was a great idea at the time. Because when you put anything on the internet, there is an element of toxicity that can exist out there, as we all know. However, what I've learned is that especially the YouTube Craftworld Eldar community is really supportive, really awesome, and really just wants to help people and just talk about the game in a very positive way. So with that in mind, I do want to kind of start doing these, if possible, every once in a while, doing a subscriber Craftworld Eldar list review. So basically how it would work is, you would, hit me up on my Gmail and say, hey, Proxy Hammer, would you mind giving me some advice on my list and maybe doing a list review on it? And what I would do is I would look at your list, I would give you a few tips, and if you wanted to make any changes to it before I put it on the channel, you would have, as much time as you wanted to do that. And then with your permission, of course, I could make a video around it and kind of discuss the possible strategies, the strengths, and perhaps maybe some of the weaknesses of the list, if there are any. So this is basically what we're going to be doing for today's video. So the first thing we're going to do is a quick review of what Hajibli's list is for and what his opponents are. And he did give me permission to use his YouTube handle. We're going to be taking a look at his 2,000 point Craftworld Eldar list. And lastly, we're going to be going over a general analysis and overview of the list. Okay, so a quick review of what Hajibli's list is for. So he told me that it was a friendly league to practice learning the rules and improving with their respective armies. So it's going to be a league that spans, I think, over the course of a couple months or more. They will be using the match play rule set and the Arcs of Omen expansion. And lastly, his opponents will be Tyranids, Tau, Death Guard, and Space Marines of the White Scars chapter. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at Hajibli's 2,000 point Craftworld Eldar list. So for his 2,000 point custom Craftworld, we have the Children of the Open Skies trait and Swift Strikes, which is a very good combo, gives a lot of mobility. Swift Strikes, of course, is an amazing trait which allows you to move, advance, shoot, and battle focus all in the same turn. Children of the Open Skies gives you +1 movement to non-flying units and +2 movement to flying units, and it also gives you automatic 3-inch advance rolls. So essentially what that means is that you cannot ever advance less than 3 inches, so that's really cool. For the no Force Orc slots, we have 2 Warlock Skyrunners. One has Protect and Jinx, one has Conceal and Reveal. And now that I'm looking at this and I've seen some of the previous iterations of his list, I think he actually probably meant to put Quicken and Restrain on the second Warlock Skyrunner. I'm not positive about that, but Hajibli, if you're watching this video, if you can clarify that for me in the comments, that'd be fantastic. But basically, Quicken and Restrain would allow you to use Warp Ritual very easily, which is a great psychic secondary, which can score you a lot of points. And it's also a great way to move units back to safety after casting psychic powers. For his HQ, we have an Autarch Skyrunner with a Laser Lance, the Sunstorm Relic, and Falcon Swiftness. So this is an extremely fast Autarch that has a insane threat range. So with the Sunstorm, he's getting 20-inch movement. With Falcon Swiftness, he's getting an additional 2 inches. And with Children of the Open Skies, he's getting an additional 2 as well. So he's going to be moving at 24 inches. And that's not even with an advance roll. So this is a very fast Autarch. And I really like this Autarch build because it's fast to get to objectives. It can also threaten things downfield behind certain pieces of terrain, which other units can't. So in the late game, this guy can take out a unit of Marines hiding behind cover. This unit can get onto an objective quickly. And honestly, is just very versatile in what they can do for the points. And of course, Sunstorm does give you objectives secured as well. He has 2 Farseer Skyrunners. One of them has Fortune, Will of Azurian, and the other one has Guide and Doom. So pretty standard setup here. Fortune is going to allow some units to survive longer. He does have some units that honestly would benefit from Fortune. And he has Will of Azurian for objective secured. he has a lot of units in his list that are very small, and Objective Secured would be a very good choice for them. And then Guide and Doom, of course, for your damage multipliers. For his troops, he has 2 units of Rangers, and these Rangers are basically just for screening purposes. His army doesn't really have a lot of units that can easily screen, which are also expendable. So having a couple of units of Rangers to screen out potential advanced deployment units, but also be able to be placed in reserve in the late game as units that can come in on turn 4 and 5 with Phantasm. So I'm going to actually make a video about this, but I recently learned that if you put units in strategic reserve with Phantasm, they can actually come in on turns 4 and 5 because they were put in reserve after the start of the first battle round. So, you could have 2 units of Rangers come in on one on turn 4, one on turn 5, and score on things like behind enemy lines, and possibly even scout the enemy as well if you are taking that, secondary objective. And for his elites, he has 10 Dire Avengers with an additional Shuriken Catapult to stand firm. This unit is basically a great unit and a great target for buffs, for damage. As all of you guys know, a guided unit with Blade Storm is a very deadly prospect to a lot of Space Marine units, especially since all of them pretty much lost Armor of Contempt. And he also has 5 Fire Dragons with a Fire Pike and Blazing Fury. So this unit is really good at basically coming in and taking out threats that other units in the army wouldn't be able to deal with. So things like heavy tanks, which are coming in, this unit can either come from strategic reserve, or even for one command point, you can webway strike it into the battlefield. And actually, in this case, Ojibli has a Falcon that can be used to drop these guys into the thick of it. They do have a Fire Pike and Blazing Fury to basically outrange any type of Auspex scan abilities and stuff like that. So the reason I like this setup is because it has the maximum amount of range possible, and usually this will allow your unit to survive easier, so you can actually get multiple turns of shooting with your Fire Dragons if you give them this setup. And the cool thing is sometimes you're even going to be in a position where maybe you don't need all the Fire Dragons to shoot at one thing, so maybe you can just move one model out of line of sight to shoot, maybe the Exarch. The Exarch gets a plus 6 additional range with the Fire Pike, so instead of 16 inches, the Exarch is actually going to get 22 inches of range, which is fairly significant. And the Exarch with the Fire Pike does have additional damage with that. So the Exarch can actually take out something like a Sentinel by himself pretty easily. Unless you get unlucky and roll ones. But even so, this unit I think is a great way to basically maintain value throughout the game and still be able to deal with big threats as they come. Now here is the mainstay of the list, is the fast attack category. Now some of the things I like about this is that it has multiple Shroud Runner units, and these units are very good at scoring victory points. So basically what you do with this is you move one unit of Shroud Runners turn 1 to use their advanced move, and then you move into the enemy deployment zone to block things up, to score on behind enemy lines, and also to disrupt the enemy with the Wire Weave grenades. And as a 3-man unit, you're really not losing much, and you're gaining a whole lot more. You're gaining victory points, you're gaining the ability to slow enemies down severely because of their large base sizes. Models can't easily move around them. And you have 3 units of these. So you can do this on 3 separate turns to delay enemy units as they come, or you could just use these to kind of hang back and also just deal damage. And because you do have an Autarch in the list, you can actually have all 9 of these guys popping in and out of terrain pretty easily, and also getting the buff of the rerolls of 1 to hit. Because normally these guys do hit on 2s. So that's also an option there. Although I think most of the time, if you're taking behind enemy lines, you're going to at least want to use one of these units in the early game to perform disruption and also be able to score on that behind enemy lines secondary objective. You also have 3 Hornets, and these are armed with scatter lasers, and I really do think that with the return of Fire and Fade, units like Warwalkers and Hornets are actually much better at producing results over the course of the game than they were before. So it is a little bit expensive to move them in and out of terrain like that. I think that maybe, if possible, I don't know if it's possible to do with the points that he has left, but if you did give these guys vectored engines, they're only 10 points on the Hornet. They could get a little bit more mileage, and you could also save some command points. So again, I don't know if that's actually possible with the build he has set up. I think even without the vectored engines, I think they're really great. They provide a very mobile threat in the backfield that can also capture late game objectives pretty easily. And because of their general mass, they can be used to block objectives as well. They're a rather expensive unit for that, but in the late game, they can be used to jump on objectives if needed. Then you also have 5 Warp Spiders with the additional Death Spinner, of course, and Power Blades, and the Web of Deceit. So this unit is a very compact unit. It's basically meant to harass enemy units, and then at some point in the game, if you find an opportunity, you can use the Web of Deceit to go to a different area of the board. And this can either be an area that your opponent wasn't expecting so that you can hit their more vulnerable units, or it can just be an easy way of, again, scoring behind enemy lines. And if you have a unit of these working in conjunction with a unit of Shroud Runners in the enemy backline, you can score 4 points a turn if you stay hidden, which is very effective. So basically, you'll be able to max out that objective very easily. So for heavy support, you have a Falcon with a Bright Lance. So again, this Falcon is meant to carry the Fire Dragons into battle to use Cloud Strike either as a turn 1, get rid of a high priority target kind of unit, or as a delayed kind of reactionary piece that just is kind of sitting in reserve until turn 3, kind of waiting to see what happens, and then responding as needed. So I think both of those options are good, but here's the other thing with the Falcon. It does have the flexibility of also just deploying normally behind some terrain. So if you want to play with your Fire Dragons more defensively in the back, and maybe your opponent has a lot of ways to deal with deep striking, you can easily just deploy it on the board normally, and basically it can act as a Wave Serpent from that point on. And there's also another cool piece to this. If you do deploy it normally in the back and you don't use its Cloud Strike ability or anything like that, when your Fire Dragons come out, they can actually threaten enemies downrange much farther than you think. So they deploy 3 inches. In this list with Children of the Open Skies, they actually move 8 inches. They advance D6, which will be a minimum of 3. And because they have Swift Strikes, they can also make a Battle Focus move after they shoot. So you may not always want a Cloud Strike. You may actually want to keep these guys in the back behind some obscuring terrain and a Falcon, and then pop out when your enemy least expects it and blow up something that he didn't think was in range. You also have 3 Warwalkers with 2 Bright Lances apiece. So I think Warwalkers with Bright Lances are going to be probably a unit that's going to be used more in the coming months in Arcs of Omen for Eldar, because of the fact that you do have unlimited fire and fades now, so you can fire and fade as much as you want. And the other thing is that for what you get, 6 Bright Lances, they're fairly cheap. You know, and they're not cheap by any means, but they're also not super expensive. So you're not spending like 400 points on these guys. You know, for 2 Fire Prisms, you'd have to spend at least 380 points typically. And for Warwalkers, you really don't have to spend that many points. So if you think about it, you're getting 4 shots with 2 Fire Prisms, which are at a much better strength than AP, and, you know, more damage, obviously. But with the Warwalkers, you are getting more attacks. So I think what advantages the Warwalkers have is that A, they're able to use advanced positions so they can block out enemy units if needed. B, they're a little bit easier to hide than Fire Prisms, so you don't really necessarily have to invest as much in things like vectored engines, so that's also a plus. Warwalkers also come with invulnerable saves. They come with a 5+ invul save. So there's a really cool thing you can actually do with Warwalkers that I enjoy doing. I don't know how relevant it is in this type of list, but if you keep them around a Farseer, you have access to the Forewarned ability. Now, Forewarned is basically an ability that allows you to shoot an incoming enemy reinforcement unit if within 18 inches of your unit, and if you're within 12 inches of a Farseer. And seeing as 2 of the opponents that Hajibli is going to be facing are Tyrannid, which might actually have some deep striking monsters in their lists, and again, I haven't really seen the lists. I don't know if they have any Trigons or anything like that coming from reserve or Mawlocks, but if they do, 3 Warwalkers with Bright Lances can easily take one out with the Forewarned ability, and the scatter lasers that he has in the backfield just won't be able to do that. So having those 3 Hornets is great against infantry units, but against something like a Mawloc or a Trigon, it's just not going to be that effective. And again, I don't know if anybody's actually running a Trigon or a Mawloc or anything like that that can deep strike in and will deep strike, but this is a good tool to have just in case for those situations. So overall, what do I think about the list? So I really think this is a strong list, and I think that it has a lot of really effective and great tools for dealing with a variety of enemy units. So you have things like scatter lasers, which are really great at killing single wound infantry, things like Tau, things like Orcs, Tyrannid, which actually, believe it or not, in my opinion, the scatter laser is actually very good against Tyrannid warriors because they're a little bit cheaper and you don't really waste wounds on, killing or overkilling an enemy warrior. So shuriken cannons, because they have damage 2, tend to overkill Tyrannid warriors and waste some of their damage. So scatter lasers are really effective against those types of targets. And the massive amount of attacks that they can put out when combined with things like Jinx is a very good way to also rip apart heavy units like Terminators. And I know that doesn't make a lot of sense to some of you. It's like, oh, well, Terminators will still get a 3+ save against that. That's true, they will. But again, if you're forcing 50 saves on a Terminator unit at a 3+, you're going to be killing a lot of Terminators regardless. He also has some really strong anti-tank tools in his list. Now, he doesn't have D-cannons in this list because Swift Strikes lists typically are more offensive in nature and don't really need, in my opinion, D-cannons to operate efficiently. However, he does have things that will destroy heavy targets. So he does have Bright Lances in his list. He does have Fire Dragons as well for a strong anti-tank unit that can basically blow up anything that comes in range pretty easily, especially with buffs. And again, with Guide and Doom, a unit of Fire Dragons can get much more than its value by shooting and killing things like a Land Raider and stuff like that, which are way more expensive than the Fire Dragons are. As for the objective game, it has a lot of objective power with a lot of tools for scoring on things like Behind Enemy Lines, Warp Ritual, and Scout the Enemy. And again, I think that Hajibli did mean to put Quicken and Restrain in his list instead of Conceal Reveal. I think probably just a typo or something because we were discussing that combination, and I think he did actually have that in his list. So he does have a very strong way to score on that secondary objective. And Scout the Enemy, I mean, again, he does have 2 units of Rangers that can come in on the boards turns 4 and 5 with Phantasm, and they can score on Scout the Enemy in the late game in the enemy deployment zone. And in general, it's also pretty versatile. And here's the thing about this list that I really like. Now, normally people would not go with this combo with the Children of Open Skies and Swift Strikes, but I actually think this combo is really good for one reason. And that is it can play a very defensive or offensive game depending on the matchup. So there are units in this list that can hang back and shoot and be happy doing that. Those same units can play very aggressively as well and be on the offensive the entire game because of the fact that you have this insane amount of speed in the list. And on top of that, if in the early game you are forced to play defensively, this list also has the ability to transition easily into offensive play as well, being able to go on the offensive basically on a dime, and not a lot of armies can do that. And honestly, not a lot of Eldar armies can do that. So when talking about Uthwé is an example of this, right? Uthwé is a very defensive type of army. And it doesn't have a lot of stuff that can go on the offensive that easily. There are a couple units that can do that in most Uthwé armies, but it's just not going to have that much. It's mainly a defensive style of play. With this list, however, you can basically go from one turn being super defensive and cagey to being super in the opponent's face, and actually it's fast enough to get into the enemy deployment zone pretty much in one turn. So, for example, your Shroud Runners. All 3 units can move 18 inches base. They advance 6 inches, so you're getting a 24-inch movement with them. They can still shoot, and then they can still make a battle focus roll after that. So, to be honest with you, this list is very fast. It can play in many different ways. It's very versatile. And I think the best part about it is that, again, it has the ability to score big on certain secondary objectives. And as far as its damage goes, it just has a lot of ways of dealing with a lot of different enemy targets. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Good luck, Ojibwe, in your league. I wish you the best. I think you're going to have a fantastic time. You have a very strong list. If anybody has any comments or suggestions for the list, please post them in the comment section. I'm sure Ojibwe would appreciate that greatly. And yeah, let me know in general what you guys think of these list reviews. If you think they're cool, let me know. And yeah, if you have any other suggestions for videos, also let me know in the comment section. We do have more content coming out this week. I have a video on Uthway coming up, and I do have a couple of other videos that I want to show you. But again, if you have suggestions, I'm definitely open to them. And if you do want to support the channel, I do have a Patreon. The link is going to be in the description. And have a great day, everybody. Peace out. Have a good one. See you guys later.